Darman and Atin looked around the plastoid-lined chamber and decided not to remove their helmets.
This is one way to find out if a nanovirus can breach our filtration masks,
Atin said. Darman checked the cupboards, looking for booby traps and other surprises.
I don't feel dead yet. Anyway, they don't leave this stuff lying around. It'll probably be sealed in something.
He checked the room. It was exactly like a medic station on Camino, except it was completely constructed from plastoid ceramic. Some of the cupboards had transparent fronts. He could see racks of vials in them. In the middle of the room, there was a separate sealed booth, running floor to ceiling with a glove box in it. It was empty. There was also a refrigerated cabinet full of flasks and small boxes. He had no idea what might be live virus and what might be the lab technician's lunch, and he wasn't going to open everything to find out. This was another case of using P for plenty.
Seeing as they're not helpful enough to label this stuff with a skull and crossbones, I'm going to set an implosion device in every room, to be on the safe side.
He ran his hands over the walls, testing for signs of metal substructures that might block his signal. The HUD showed 0 from his glove sensors. He checked his comlink to be sure that he could get a signal outside.
Darman here. Anyone receiving? Over.
V here.
The inner chamber's clear. I'm setting charges, and then we're going to move out into the rest of the building.
We're approaching the front. It's gone quiet out here, and we think you've still got up to 30 tinnies for company.
Is that you shaking the ground?
Majestic.
Good to know the Navy's here.
Leaving the helmet comlink channel, by the way. Make sure you leave us your visual feed.
We'll let you know if it spoils our concentration. Darman out.
He gave Atin a dubious thumbs up and took the implosion charges out of his pack. He could improvise most devices, but these were special, guaranteed to create such a high-temperature fireball and shockwave that they would destroy not only everything standing in a half-click radius, but also every microorganism and virus as well. They were disappointingly small for such massively destructive power, a little smaller than the average remote. Darman still had 2. It was overkill, and overkill made him feel safer. He picked up the lidded boxes in the refrigeration unit and tested each for weight very carefully before finding a lighter one that suggested it was half empty. He set it on the table, held his breath, and eased off the lid. It held a few metal tubes with sealed caps and enough space for one of the devices. He placed the thermal carefully inside and replaced the container.
Go careful,
Atin said, indicating the boxes.
I will.
He found another lightweight box and peered inside.
There. And if they get to searching, they might even stop after they find one device.
He closed the refrigerator door.
That won't reduce the blast any, will it?
Atin asked.
Not so you'd notice, believe me. Time for a tour of the building, then.
There were status panels to the right of the door, set to warn some monitoring system if the chamber was opened, and a hand-sized button marked Emergency Close, a smart precaution if you were handling deadly viruses. Opening the door would advertise the fact that they had gained entry to the building. Atin moved in and carefully unclipped the control plate. He took out a disruptive device about the size of a stylus and held it just clear of the exposed circuits. It was much the same technology as a mini EMP, only with a less powerful electromagnetic pulse. Nobody wanted a full-strength EMP going off a few centimeters from their HUD, hardened or not.
Next big bang,
Atin said.
Then they might think they've just taken a hit.
The ground shook again, and Atin touched the mini EMP against the control panel. Status lights winked out. The door gave a sigh as it lost its safety vacuum seal. A thin vertical gap opened in the smooth ceramic. Sound now filtered in from the outside. Explosions, shouts from officers, the occasional monotone response of tinnies. He stood back and gestured to Darman. The gap was big enough to admit a flat endoscope, as well as the claws of the ram. He slid the probe cautiously through and checked the image it was receiving. The corridor lights were flickering. There was no movement.
I'll force the doors, and you stand by. I'll be ready to lob in an EMP grenade and a flashbang. Both?
Atin said.
Yeah, I don't want to waste any either, but we've got wets and tinnies out there somewhere.
Darman wedged the ram's claws into the gap and locked the bars in place. It was more awkward to configure it as a spreader than as a simple ram, but he didn't want to blow it open. He pumped the ratchet handle furiously. An 8 metric ton force slowly pushed the doors apart. Atin checked outside with the endoscope again, then stepped through the opening with his DC raised.
Clear!
Darman dismantled the ram and hurriedly hooked it back into his webbing.
Room by room then. Killing house time.
That was something they'd done many times before. Each time they entered the killing house on Camino for an exercise, the walls and doors had been reconfigured. Sometimes they knew what they were going to find, and sometimes it was like a real house clearance, a sequence of nasty surprises that they had to take as they came. But there was a lot more at stake now than their individual lives. Atin gestured left. The inner corridor was a ring with doors leading off it, and a single passage to the front entrance. At least there were no stairs or turbolifts to cover. They moved almost back to back, pausing at the corner to slide the endoscopic probe out far enough to check.
Oh boy,
Atin said, just as the first droid swung around and blasted. Darman heard the clatter of metal feet from exactly the opposite direction, and for a frozen moment, he found himself staring down his scope at a very surprised Umbaran officer. Darman fired. So did Atin. They both kept firing down their respective ends of the corridor.
Okay, Plan D,
Atin said.
Niner, we're pinned down here. Over.
We're concentrating fire on the front.
Niner's voice cut back with a background of explosions both near and farther away. That was why Darman didn't like having a 4-way open comlink during an engagement. The noise and chatter were overwhelming.
They pulled back inside, but nobody's coming out.
We haven't located Uthon yet.
Can you hold the position?
Can you see where we are? West side corridor, left of the entrance.
Atin emptied a clip into 2 droids that came around the corner. There was no noise except for their respective panting.
Duh.
Still here, Niner.
Back to back with Atin, he waited and stared down the polished hallway 20 meters ahead. There were 2 doors on the right, unconventional hinged doors. He glanced up at the ceiling to locate the emergency bulkheads. One was on the other side of Atin, and the next was between them and the inner chamber. If those were activated, they'd be cut off on both sides, boxed in and waiting to be picked off. And then anyone could easily enter the biohaz chamber and defuse the implosion device. It seemed that someone had the same idea at the same time, because there was a noise, and then the quiet whine of a small motor. The bulkheads were descending from their housing.
Atin, chamber, now!
Darman yelled, even though he didn't need to, and they both sprinted back toward the chamber. The bulkhead was down to waist level when they reached it and skidded under on their knees. It sealed with a clunk behind them. It was suddenly so silent that Darman knew another bulkhead had closed somewhere along the ring, sealing them in. There was the sound of a door unlocking manually, a real noise, and then nothing.
Start again,
Darman sighed.
Let's see what's around there.
Atin moved forward and edged out the scope. He paused. He sat back on his heels and shook his head.
Show me,
Darman said, and switched his HUD to the scope view, expecting disaster.
I think it's called irony.
Darman crawled up to him and patched the endoscope into his own helmet. Yes, irony was a good word for it. He almost laughed. Between the corner and the next bulkhead, he could see 2 doors, one closed and one partly open. Someone humanoid, was peering around the edge of it.
Women don't half look different, don't they?
Atin said.
That's the most amazing hair I've ever seen.
Darman agreed. They hadn't seen a lot of females in their lives, but this one would have been memorable even if they'd seen millions. Her blue-black hair was streaked with brilliant red stripes. They were trapped with Dr. Ovalot Quail Uthan, and she was clutching a Burpine shattergun.